So now let's talk about why we do the loading phase. Why was that a part of it? Now, to be honest, the why part of this whole thing is a little bit vague to me still. It's kind of one of those things that I feel like it doesn't end up hurting me to do it. So I go ahead and do it since that's the way the protocol was originally written, and we don't have enough people experimenting without loading to know if it ends up turning out the same. So because of that, I do it. But the information I'm going to give you, I don't know if it's can be completely proven or if it makes complete sense, but this is the reasoning that we have at this time. So the first point is that it takes a couple days for the hCG to be fully in effect in your system. You know, you're taking a very small dose, so apparently it takes a couple days to be in your system enough for you to be comfortable on the 500 calorie diet, because hCG really does affect your hunger. It does change your hunger. That is one thing I am certain of. And changes in dosage will change your hunger. It's pretty amazing, actually. So because of that, the idea is that you need to eat high-fat foods so that when you start the diet, you have easily accessible fat stores right at the start so that you won't be like overly hungry. That's the idea, I believe. So it's just to make you comfortable for those first days on the diet. Supposedly, if you don't load and you just start VLCD, you can experience a lot more hunger. And that leads me to the second reason for loading, which is supposedly that eating high fat because you are taking hCG, right, while you're loading as well. That's when you first start. hCG is on the loading phase. The idea is that supposedly taking in the fats actually helps the hormone, the hCG hormone, basically know where your fat stores are. And, you know, it's plausible. I don't know. I mean, I wish I had a little bit more proof about this, but it's plausible. You know, there's all kinds of things about this protocol that seem crazy, but that I definitely do believe because I've seen it over and over. And, you know, this could be another one of those things. But so basically it's like you're eating high fat, you're taking hCG, which makes your body more sensitive to fats. So you gain fat more quickly. And so I guess it's like if your body is storing fat while you're loading, wherever it's going on your body, the hormone can then like find where that fat is. So I don't know, like, if that sounds silly, I'm sorry. I'm just sharing kind of from what I've read what the idea behind it is. Again, I don't even know that I totally, completely believe it or feel sure that that is true. But like I said, loading hasn't hurt me, so it's kind of like, why not? Just to be safe, we might as well do it. And, you know, truth be told, there definitely is a strikingly different like body reshaping that takes place on the hCG diet that doesn't seem to happen with other diets. It is true that you seem to lose fat from trouble areas that, you know, on other diets it doesn't matter how hard you try or how hard you work out, you just can't get rid of fat. It's like you're thin everywhere else, but then you still have these bulges of fat in these, you know, trouble areas. Whereas with hCG, if you spend any time looking at before and after photos of people who've done hCG and actually like reached like their end goal, like they're done with hCG, you will usually find that their body looks extremely well balanced. That's one of the things that stood out to me when I was researching the diet, that actually was one of the things that convinced me to try it. I just kept seeing like results after results of real people, like I would find them on YouTube, and it was amazing. It wasn't like they were skinny on top but still big on bottom, or skinny on bottom but still big on top. It was like they were so well balanced, like they had really lost fat from everywhere. And, you know, so maybe this loading phase has to do with that. I don't know. So I'm just sharing that with you guys. Now I want to mention the one last thing again about the loading clean or loading low carb thing. If you are going to load, I feel like there's a third purpose to loading if you choose to load low carb. And that is that you're going to get rid of the sensations of extra hunger, cravings, and carb withdrawals and low blood sugar that you might experience if you just load the traditional way. So just some food for thought on that. I want to talk a little bit more in depth about the why behind the loading if you care to listen. If not, you can be done at this point and have enough information. But I want to talk about, first of all, what the purpose of loading is not, okay? I'm going to quote a section from an hCG site that I came across, and I'll keep them anonymous. But basically on their site, they stated that loading also makes you get your fill of those foods you can't have while on the very low calorie diet portion of the diet. It really makes you not want those foods for a while and keeps you from wanting to cheat. So I'm sorry, but in my opinion, that's total baloney. If any of you have what you would call a junk food eating lifestyle right now, how many years have you been eating fast food or chocolate cake on a daily basis? And how many of you got sick of it after a few days? Like if you've been eating it every day or several times a week for years, you obviously never got sick of it and didn't want it. So I don't really see why eating those foods on hCG would somehow all of a sudden, after 10 or 20 years of eating like that, make you not want to eat those foods. Now, it is true that when you get uncomfortably full, you do feel kind of sick of something and you don't want any more of it. But for me anyway, that only lasted for several hours until I was hungry again. And that's the case, my first couple rounds, I did load the traditional way. I had cartons of ice cream, I had my chewy chocolate Chips Ahoy cookies that I loved back then, and I ate all that stuff. And yeah, for, about 6-7 hours, I was like, oh, I'm done with that. But as soon as my body had digested that food and I was hungry again, pretty much when you start the first low calorie day, you're gonna be hungry. You're gonna be hungry that day, especially if you load the regular way. It takes a few days for your body to adjust to all of a sudden going from tons of sugar and carbs and high calorie to 500 calories and no sugar hardly. So you're gonna feel hungry. And so, my first VLCD of my first round, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I felt pretty starving. And I was walking around, and right about then, all the stuff that I had been eating the past couple of days while loading sounded really good to me. So anyway, I just want to bring that out because, perhaps there are people out there who have a healthier eating lifestyle already, and maybe they couldn't lose weight because of a hormone problem, like a thyroid problem. And so maybe for you, having a little bit of an indulgence, maybe a piece of pecan pie or cheesecake as a part of your load, that may be no big deal, and maybe it is kind of like that where oh, I got to have a taste of something that I like now and then, and now I'll be happy for a while. I feel like the majority of people who are embarking on this protocol really have some problems with their relationship with food and their eating habits. That's what I had. And so for us, eating a lot more of the foods we're addicted to isn't going to help you not want those foods when you start the diet. So again, it's just some food for thought when you want to think about the whole clean loading thing. So if I get 10 people to email me otherwise, I will take this section out of the article. But until then, I personally think that it's foolish to think that binging is going to make you not want to binge. So I hope said that way, it makes sense. All right, moving on. I want to quote a couple of authorities on the hCG diet who discussed the purpose of loading, just to give you a little more feedback on what it's supposed to be for. And again, I don't have a completely clear, 100% clear, oh, this is exactly what's happening when you're loading on hCG and this is why we need to do it. This is one of those things that I don't feel completely sure about. But let me just quote you the two sources. The first is Dr. Simeons himself. And this is what he stated in his book, Pounds and Inches, about loading on the hCG diet. He said, one cannot keep a patient comfortable on 500 calories unless his normal fat reserves are reasonably well stocked. It is for this reason also that every case, even those that are actually gaining, must eat to capacity of the most fattening food they can get down until they have had the third injection. It is a fundamental mistake to put a patient on 500 calories as soon as the injections are started, as it seems to take about 3 injections before abnormally deposited fat begins to circulate and thus become available. We distinguish between the first 3 injections, which we call non-effective as far as the loss of weight is concerned, and the subsequent injections given while the patient is dieting, which we call effective. So that's what he had to say about it. And when you read Dr. Simeon's protocol, it seems like, because remember, this protocol was written back in like the 50s or something like that, 1950s, and it seemed like a lot of his patients were like chronic dieters, like people who were constantly under eating a lot, and so that kind of puts a different light on things, because now I feel like that's not necessarily the case. I feel like a lot of people starting this diet now are chronic overeaters. I was. Some of you may not be, but with all the fast food chains, all the food that Americans eat, the problem is more overeating and processed foods and stuff. So, I don't know if that changes things a little bit, but it is of note that he said that it takes about 3 days or 3 injections before abnormal fat starts circulating and becoming available for your body to use. So it may be almost kind of like what I was talking about with transitioning from high carb to low carb. Basically, your body transitioning from using food for fuel to using your fat for fuel, and eating higher fats during that period maybe makes it easier. Okay, so the second authority that I want to quote is Robin Woodall, which many of you guys know. If you don't, she's the author of Weight Loss Apocalypse, Emotional Eating Rehab Through the hCG Protocol. And if you have not read her book, I highly, highly recommend it. I will link to it in the blog post. And you can get it on Amazon. I believe there's both a hard copy and like a Kindle type version. It's excellent. She has overseen thousands of patients on the hCG protocol, and so she really knows a lot. In her book, she states regarding fat loading, the relationship between the small dose of hCG and fat's stimulation of leptin requires 3 days of forced feeding. So if you didn't catch that, she's saying that dose of hCG and fat's stimulation of leptin. So it's going to stimulate leptin, which leptin has to do with hunger. Eating high-fat foods to full capacity during those days acts as a catalyst, ensuring sufficient blood leptin is stimulated by the 4th day that warrants the drastic drop to the 500-calorie protocol. And now please note here, it might seem like a slight discrepancy. Robin actually advocates a 3-day load, whereas Dr. Simeon's recommended just 2 days for the average healthy non-dieting adult. And so, that's up to you what you choose to do. Again, I have a post talking about when to consider loading 3 days or not, and I'll link to that. I found 2 days to be sufficient for me for my rounds. One way to figure it out is to see how much weight you gain the first couple days, and also how full you feel the 3rd day. Like when you wake up, you could technically start BLCD, or you could do a 3rd load day. I usually base it off of how I feel. Like, do I feel like I could eat more, or do I still feel just as full as when I went to bed? And my last couple rounds, I just felt so full when I woke up in the morning. I felt like I knew I was ready to start the diet. But so what does this really mean? Is none of it making sense? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I think I need some more science classes or something. I actually do enjoy doing a lot of research. I love researching stuff about cortisol and glycogen stores, and I do like the science behind nutrition and how food works with our body and what happens in our body and all of that stuff. But this particular stuff, I haven't fully grasped yet. But Robin does talk a lot about how hCG interacts with leptin and how she feels that's one of the mechanisms behind how the protocol works. And so, if you do some more reading, I'm sure it'll make more sense. But basically, in a nutshell, it's one of those things that it appears to be important, and the vast majority of people do the loading phase, and so I feel like it's worth doing at this time. For myself. In the future, if more people try out not loading, for instance, I would be curious to see what the results are. And again, my interest is not so much just in like scale weight results, like, oh, how much weight I lost. There's so much more to the picture about success than that. And I don't even think that, honestly, that's even a good tool at all, really, to use for you know, knowing if you had success on the diet. With this protocol, it's like you want to make sure that your hormones stay balanced, and if you do things off protocol, it can affect your hormones in a negative way, which, you know, can mess you up both on the diet and after, as well as how much fat versus muscle that you're losing. That's also important as well, and it's possible that keeping the loading phase in there can help ensure that you lose as little muscle as possible. So anyway, I hope you guys found that helpful. You know, if you want to find out how much weight you most likely will gain loading and how long it takes to get it off, stuff like that, I have another article about that and I'll link to it. And yeah, that's it. Okay, you guys, take care. Bye.